Welcome to Courtyard Urbanism, Building Cities for Families, presented by Oratorio. My name is Daniel Rosh, president of Oratorio. We have 4 great speakers lined up today in promoting urban development in and around Fox Park. We want to start by promoting the amenities of Fox Park. First, we have this beautiful cathedral of South St. Louis, built in 1907. It's the second largest cathedral in the St. Louis metropolitan area, and its stained glass windows are world-class. We're also home to perhaps the highest caliber choir in the St. Louis region. We also have the restaurant Little Fox, which was rated in the top 50 restaurants in the nation by New York Times. Perhaps our most popular amenity is Coffee Stamp, our local coffee shop located on Jefferson Avenue. And we have a new apartment complex located just 2 blocks from where we sit right now called the Koken Apartments, along with a second building called Koken, Ohio, which has a grand opening next month in October. And here to talk about it is Brittany Tolliver.
Thank you for having me. Like he was saying, my name is Brittany. I'm the assistant manager for the Koken and the Koken on Ohio. It's a pleasure to stand before you today, celebrating our journey and remarkable milestones we've reached with the Koken and Koken on Ohio. Just 2 years ago, we embarked on this adventure with the Koken on Texas Avenue, where our vision was clear: to create a thriving residential community that fosters connection, creativity, and convenience. Today, I am proud to share that since the beginning of the year, we have consistently maintained an impressive occupancy rate of 90% or higher. This accomplishment signifies not only the appeal of our properties, but also the undeniable demand for innovative living spaces that cater to members of the community. As we unveil Koken on Ohio, we are not just opening the doors to another building. We are unveiling a new way of living that epitomizes the principles of courtyard urbanism. In a city full of history, we have taken great care to honor the bustling community character that makes Fox Park unique. With our beautifully designed courtyard incorporated into our new development, Koken on Ohio offers the opportunity to enjoy a peaceful space with privacy, even within the heart of a dense urban environment. This initiative is part of a larger movement in redevelopment where we embrace the charm of historic neighborhoods while inviting new residents to plant their roots here. At Koken on Ohio, we pay homage to the rich history of our site, which was once home to the Koken Art Factory, a hub of creativity and craftsmanship. By transforming this historic landmark, we are not only preserving its legacy, but also revitalizing the spirit of the community that thrived there for decades. Now, let me take a moment to highlight some of the exceptional amenities Koken on Ohio offers to enhance the quality of life for our residents. Firstly, we have incorporated marker spaces, a dedicated area where families and budding entrepreneurs can launch or expand businesses right from their homes. This modern twist on the live work balance allows for creativity to flourish without the need to leave the premises. Our fitness center promotes an active lifestyle, ensuring that residents can stay and engage without the necessity of commuting to distant suburban gyms. The convenience of wellness facilities within your reach means more time spent enjoying family and community. At the heart of Koken on Ohio lies our beautiful courtyard, designed as a communal space offering opportunities for connection among neighbors. Here, residents can gather, socialize, and strengthen their bonds and make a neighborhood feel like home. We believe this thoughtful community design is what urbanism should look like, a place that is adapted for St. Louis, where people truly connect with one another. Moreover, our walkability within Fox Park means that residents will find themselves just steps away from historic buildings, local businesses, and cultural amenities. It's a reminder that density can support thriving neighborhoods, reinforcing the idea that a strong community is built not only on housing, but also on access to culture and commerce. In closing, the Koken on Ohio, we are igniting a new chapter in the story of Fox Park. Together, we can strengthen the fabric of our historic neighborhoods while cultivating an inviting atmosphere for new residents. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey.
Thank you, Brittany. Next up is the president and co-founder of Black Line Design and Construction, who designed, developed, and owns these two Koken buildings, investing $40 million in the Fox Park neighborhood. We present to you Michael Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Well, one of the first questions that Daniel had asked me to talk about was, why did you choose Fox Park? And I'd like to say it was an easy choice. We always planned on it. It was always going to happen. That's actually not the case. We founded our company 16 years ago. I had previously been in urban redevelopment, and it wasn't so much about the neighborhood. It was about the project and property type and the impact that we could have on communities. And one of the goals that we have when we are seeking out projects are to preserve and reuse historic buildings, preferably vacant ones, to utilize state and federal historic tax credits and to rehabilitate those buildings to National Park Service standards, and to be able to create housing options that provide super high quality, high-end finishes, and amenities at a price that is significantly less expensive than some of the quote, new luxury projects that we all see going on, mostly in the central corridor, Central West End, et cetera. And so over the years, we started on the outskirts of the Central West End, down into Gravois Park, Dutchtown, downtown West. However, we had always had our eye on Fox Park. Who remembers, probably less than 10 years ago, this part of Fox Park before Rung was there. This was a vacant industrial 2 square blocks, and now it is kind of one of the more densely packed areas in the city because of what we've done between Rung and us. And so when the opportunity presented itself to purchase the Koken buildings, if you will, we knew that the time was right. We knew that the opportunity was what we were looking for. Fox Park was attractive to us because over the previous few years, there had been a trend of families moving in, young professionals, and with Rung's investment and with the stability of St. Francis de Sales, we saw it as a neighborhood that wanted to improve, and we wanted to be part of that community. When looking at projects, we also look at size. We never want to do a project so big that it creates its own community and it becomes insular. We want to do projects that are in that 25 to 75 unit range where they really get to become part of the existing community. So I guess it was maybe 2000, we purchased what we call the Koken, which had been owned by DeSales Community Housing. They had attempted to embark on a project to turn it into co-working and an incubator space, which just proved the market wasn't there for that. So we took it on, created 78 residential units, and designed them well and priced them affordably. And affordable, I recognize, is relative to your current situation, but under market for the project type. And the community responded and they filled up. Phase 2 is the Koken on Ohio, which is the one closer to Rung that is opening with tenants moving in, residents moving in just 2 weeks, thanks to Brittany and her amazing marketing and leasing. So we're kind of wrapping up this 150 unit investment in these two buildings, and saving the buildings that were the original home of the Koken Barber Chair Company. And very happy, very proud to be part of the community, to have taken a vacant industrial parcels and brought them back to life, saved the buildings, and bring new residents to be part of the Fox Park community, part of the St. Francis community, part of the St. Louis community. We've had a lot of people move in from out of town and from the suburbs, and that's really rewarding to see when you're doing what we're doing. So, yeah. Thank you.
We'll hand it to you. Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have the co-founder and executive director of Oratorio, the nonprofit hosting this event. He'll be talking about the intention of Oratorio, which spans music and urban development. We present to you James Marck.
There is a genre of joke that begins with the motif: an X, a Y, and a Z walked into a bar. Some of the variations include a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead walked into a bar, and another one is a priest, a rabbi, and a minister walked into a bar. When I look around the room today, I feel a little bit like I'm at the beginning of one of these jokes. A courtyard urbanist, an owner of a major urban construction firm, and an advocate of Gregorian chant walked into the basement of a church. A couple summers ago, a friend of mine in Miami was sharing some of the local gossip with me. She was telling me about the Walt Disney cruise ship that they had just finished designing that docks there. And there was a controversy that all the locals were fussing about. Disney had been militant about making sure that the cruise ship was on brand, and so they chose to keep all the colors of the boat exclusively limited to those which are found in the palette of Mickey Mouse. Black was easy. You have to have that color at the bottom of the ship by law. Red, an accent color. White got on there. When it came time to include the color of Mickey Mouse's buttons, yellow, Mickey Mouse yellow, they decided, we'll put those on the lifeboats. But then they ran into trouble with an international nautical commission, which had a law that said you can't paint just any color, the lifeboats. Science has proven they must be a particular shade of orange that can be seen through adverse weather conditions by rescue helicopters. So Disney wasn't going to take no for an answer. They funded their own multi-billion-dollar international nautical commission to research that scientifically Mickey Mouse yellow can, in fact, be seen through adverse weather conditions from rescue helicopters. So they got their color. Then on top of that, they trademarked the color so that no other cruise ships could have Mickey Mouse yellow for their lifeboats. Their vision, I suppose, was that, God forbid, the ship hit an iceberg and everyone's dodging near death. At least everybody's still on brand. I share this story with you to show you what extent an organization will go to preserve its brand. This is sort of a marketing gimmick to some of us, but it has roots in ancient aesthetics, cohesion. But what Disney has done is what I consider sort of a utilitarian reduction of this idea. It's what in marketing we call an experience economy. That's basically an index of the different sensory encounters you're going to have when engaging or consuming a singular product, or a product that after the fact appears in your memory to have been a singular experience. Next week, the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra will kick off its season with a performance not in a concert hall, but in not Fox. We've been talking about Fox Park a lot today, so I'm going to accidentally call Forest Park Fox Park. Forest Park at Art Hill, the Basin. And if you were to go, the program will suggest, great classical music, right? But when you arrive, classical music will not be the first artistic medium that you engage with. And it won't be the food trucks either, though that's coming later. It'll be the air you're breathing, and it'll be the trees, and it'll be the statue of St. Louis, King of France, that hits you. Then you're going to smell some food. There'll be people having picnics. Then you'll taste some food, and now your mind is thinking about what you're tasting, but you haven't lost sight of St. Louis, King of France. The sun is setting. Then a violin starts to play. From a purely utilitarian perspective, these are all experience economies. We're listing the different things and we're planning them so that you can sort of get that perfect sweet spot of the Venn diagram of all the most enjoyable experiences. Disney doesn't just paint its lifeboats yellow, it designs and trademarks its own air fresheners so that when you walk into the vestibules of its resorts, even the air you're breathing is their brand. Experience economy is a marketing reduction of what in ancient history the Italians referred to as il più nell'uno. Il più nell'uno, which if crammed into English transliterates something to the effect of the most in the one. All of these things, which we would break apart and dissect, coming together in a convergence on one point that in our memory is retained as a singular experience. If you were to go to the St. Louis concert next week, you will see all these things separately, but when you go home, that becomes a single snow globe in your head. And this is exemplified beautifully by the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who describes not only what it is, but how it is to be achieved in terms of the personnel involved. Quote, "The standard of beauty is the entire circuit of natural forms, the totality of nature, which the Italians express by defining beauty as il più nell'uno, the most in the one." He continues, "The poet, the painter, the sculptor, the musician, and the architect must seek each other to concentrate this radiance of the world on one point. In short, the poet, the painter, the architect, the musician, the sculptor must all be at very least talking to each other and able to cooperate." Well, we have an example, and we don't have to go all the way to Italy to see it, of such a convergence of these multiple experiences coming together in one place to make a singular experience. And it's that activity which occurs in the nave directly in the space above our heads every time a liturgy occurs here at St. Francis de Sales Oratory. In a video that was recently produced by Fleur de Lis Films for the Oratory, Canon Cogshaw, director in the voiceover, observes all the senses are engaged in the liturgy. Your sense of taste, your sense of touch, your sense of sight, your sense of sound. And it's not as gimmicky as painting the lifeboats yellow. This benefit is, of course, immediately to the purposes of the liturgy, which are spiritual, which are salvific, but they don't stop there. In 2023, a study which was conducted by the National Fund for Sacred Spaces in Washington, D.C., found St. Francis de Sales Oratory to be the catalyst for economic impact to the effect of $7 million on Fox Park. This was measured across a variety of cohorts, including direct spending, education, tourism, magnet effect, which is the ability to draw other investors to the same neighborhood, and, the most important for families, invisible safety net, the deterrence to crime produced by increased foot traffic and permanent human presence, partly by the congregation's 7-day liturgical schedule, but especially by the canons of the Institute of Christ the King, their oblates and oblate candidates, who for 20 years have laid head to pillow in this neighborhood and woken every morning from it during the time that when Mr. Schwartz mentioned it was an abandoned industrial wasteland. Impact, therefore, begins with this example set by the church. It begins with souls, person to person, face to face. The third glorious decade of the Rosary asks for the special grace that one should be able to have the zeal for charity and zeal for souls. It's like there's a bumper sticker that says, start seeing motorcycles. I think we should have one that says, start seeing souls. Stop seeing groups, stop seeing demographics. Cultural enrichment is the engagement of souls. It's not just the creation of a program that then is delegated to an institution. It's face-to-face, like you and I are doing right now. If I got a nickel as the music director here, every time a family said, we would do so much more and we want to, if we could be closer to the church, if we could live in Fox Park, if we could walk there. I used to work for a church in Rockford that had rehearsal for its choirs 6 nights a week, but this was in the 40s. The churches were the center of the neighborhood. In 2024, a new nonprofit organization was incorporated with the state of Missouri, operating under the auspices of this oratory, with the express purpose of constitutionalizing the findings of the National Fund study, perpetuating them into the future, as well as into the greater halo of the oratory's presence, the wake of the oratory, the residents of the neighborhood of Fox Park. We took the name Oratorio after the vision of St. Philip Neri, who in the 16th century saw fit to set up a public-facing arm of the church, using its musical and architectural and aesthetic mediums to sing Bible stories to the ordinary residents of the city of Rome, including its street gypsies. Oratorio, by the way, was the grandparent of the genre we know as opera, sort of the successful child that moved out of the house. Oratorio, the mission of it is to enhance with traditional music the collective effort to keep St. Louis a beautiful place to live. When I say collective effort, I mean shared by individuals you've heard from today and will hear from in a moment. We believe we can do this by incorporating music cultivation, not just curation, into the spatial, architectural, and civic spaces of our neighborhood. Oratorio exists to build inroads between artist and architect, between composer and civil engineer, a model set for us not only in the liturgy here, but by the Italian Renaissance, when the Medici family, merchants, not necessarily artists per se, bankrolled the majority of the artists whose work today many a person points to say, that's the gold standard of Western art. If you take out Lorenzo de' Medici, even though he would have been born, none of us would know who Michelangelo was. We wouldn't know what the Sistine Chapel was. Artists can no longer today live in a vacuum and preach ideology from their instruments. They have to be working in tandem with urban developers, with churches, with communities. Oratorio is here to help the process of getting those people back together at the same table so that art can be reunited with the builders of things, where inspiration meets impact. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And now for our keynote speaker who traveled here from Chicago to speak with us, Alicia Pederson. She was the inspiration for this event. With 10,000 followers on Twitter, her message has a good reach, and one day earlier this year appeared in my feed. I found her ideas fascinating for several reasons and knew that I needed to organize an event so that her message could reach more people, especially in my coveted city of St. Louis. There are several factors that make her stand out from all others who speak on urbanism. First, she's a mother of 3. Mothers play a huge role in families, undervalued in modern society. Overrepresented in academics are childless men who are missing both the lived experience of raising a family, but also the female perspective on family-friendly environments. She has lived experience, which causes families to leave the city, of what causes families to leave the city, and how to help them stay in the city. Second, she speaks to all levels of society, religious and non-religious, all levels of education, urban and rural. She's very intelligent, has a PhD in Renaissance Italian and English literature. She's been published in multiple times in the Chicago Tribune, among other publications. Many academics at this level cater their message only towards other academics by using complex vocabulary that communicates more their status in society than it does their core message. Alicia makes the case for courtyard urbanism using everyday language and concepts that everyone can understand. And third, she's advocating for concepts that already exist in all the great cities around the world, cities that have existed for hundreds and thousands of years. This is not a theoretical idea that she's presenting today. It's empirically proven through generations. With that, we introduce you to our keynote speaker, Alicia Pederson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. It is really exciting to be here. I came in yesterday and had a tour of St. Louis. Can you guys hear me okay? Good. And I was enchanted. I was amazed by the neighborhoods I saw and the architecture and also the obvious recent efforts of revitalization that's going on, not just in this neighborhood, but in all around St. Louis. And I was so impressed and excited for St. Louis. And I'm really excited to present this material to you today. And I have a lot of it. And I'm going to jump right in because I want to get it in under an hour. So I know that cities need families, and I know that families need cities. And this is an idea that we will explore as I explain why US cities have struggled to retain families and why European cities have had greater success in retaining families, and what urban planning and housing tweaks that US cities can make to make neighborhoods that are green yet dense. So we'll be focusing on courtyard blocks. And you see here on the left, this is a very nice large courtyard block in Copenhagen, Denmark. And this video shows the view of someone who is standing in the middle of that particular courtyard. And so you get a sense of the view from the inside. And courtyard blocks help cities appeal to families because they provide the big house with a yard and the proximity to the urban, economic, social, and cultural centers of society. They're the foundation of urban neighborhoods that are valuable, inclusive, and affordable places where normal families can thrive for generations. And they've existed for millennia in European cities, but they don't exist in North America. Okay, and we're going to go into a little bit why. It's really interesting. But here, families mostly live in the suburbs. And before the suburbs existed, they mostly lived in the country or in small towns. But surveys and real estate data show that Americans increasingly are disenchanted with the suburbs, and they want walkable neighborhoods in communities. They want that lifestyle, but there are so few good walkable neighborhoods in cities that are affordable that families are unable to move into them. And this is where St. Louis comes in. Okay, St. Louis has the opportunity to be the affordable, family-friendly city that Americans need today. It has amazing urban bones. It has world-class institutions. It has enchanting architectural traditions. It has strong business ties and these fantastic neighborhoods. It also has a lot of vacant and underdeveloped land. And it can and should be developed into family-friendly neighborhoods. So let me show you the program for the presentation. Okay, so here's a program, and now, how did I get into writing about courtyard blocks and family-friendly cities? So around 2023, 2024, I began noticing families leaving from my idyllic neighborhood in the Lincoln Square neighborhood of Chicago. I live in Lincoln Square with my husband, Pete, and my 3 children. We bought a house in this neighborhood in 2017. And we bought in this neighborhood because it is one of the most family-friendly, walkable neighborhoods. Our kids walk to school. We've got a wonderful community. We have all the things that urban neighborhoods should be. But I began to notice in really 2023, 2024, that a lot of families began leaving. And it was not because they disliked urban living. They liked city living. The schools are excellent. There's a great public school option in addition to multiple good private schools. And there's no crime. Crime is not a problem in this neighborhood. They were leaving because they could not afford a house with a yard. And often they would be like a family of 4 in a 2-bedroom condo or a 2-bedroom rental, and they were expecting a 3rd kid, and they just could not make it work anymore. They didn't have a yard. They needed to move to a house with a 3rd or 4th bedroom and a yard. And at the same time, I was paying attention to national reporting that was really becoming prominent in media last summer about the shocking decline of families living in urban areas after the pandemic. So in like New York City and LA and Chicago, there are double-digit decreases in the percentage of families that are living in, with children under 18 living in the cities. And it was visible to me in Chicago that this was affecting our neighborhood too. So there are shocking recent declines, but really US cities have always had trouble retaining families. And you can see that on these charts. On the left, you see the population in metro areas by central cities in blue and suburbs in green. The population that's not in the central city or suburb, of course, is in the country or in small towns. But really, like, you know, the urban population peaks in 1950 at about 30% and then declines and is stagnant, while the story of the 20th century is the rapid suburbanization of the United States. Now, St. Louis, and this is not just the case with St. Louis, this happens in other cities, but we have a more pronounced change with the city population peaking in 1950 and then a fall off, and then the rise of the suburban, and now you see a steeper rise, like a stagnation in the suburban and a rise in the outer Missouri counties and the exurbs. Now, the urban family exodus and just generally the suburbanization of America had always bothered me because I had seen family-friendly cities when I lived in Italy. And in comparison, the US cities seem designed to be anti-family. They seem designed to push families into the suburbs. So when I was 22, I moved to Florence to au pair, to be a nanny for a Florentine family. And they lived in this palazzo, they call them a palazzo, and it's a building from the 1500s. They had the ground floor in here. It was like a 4,000 square foot apartment, a condo, they owned it. There was an attached garage. And during this time, I also tutored English, and so I saw the inside of a lot of family homes, and I really got a good sense of how normal Florentine families lived. And it struck me as the ideal arrangement for families because when they walked out their front door, they had access to hundreds of shops and stores and commercial and business destinations. They also had their social network, not just friends and business connections, but also their family. The children had both sets of grandparents, all their aunts and uncles, this vast social network in the neighborhood or in the neighborhood next over. And so they had the bustling city out the front door, but then out the back door, they had a backyard or a courtyard in the city. And when you stepped into the courtyard, it was entering this garden dimension where everything was clean and quiet. And you couldn't hear the mopeds and the sirens from the outside. And it was cool and shaded, and it was just this tranquil oasis in the middle of the city. And half of you speak Latin, so you'll appreciate the hortus in urbe, the garden in the city. And this is this Latin motto that has forever signified the value that humans have placed in having a garden, having that green space in the dense city center. So While I was traveling around Europe and reading widely in early modern European literature for my doctoral research, I noticed that in the most valuable and attractive and enduringly valuable neighborhoods in Europe, we see this typology. So here's Edinburgh, Scotland. Here's Copenhagen, Denmark, which recently stole the title of most livable city from Vienna, which is also a courtyard urbanism city. Here's Oslo, Norway. Notice that they don't all look the same. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. They come in a lot of different finishes, okay? We saw those beautiful stone ones in Edinburgh. This was originally social housing or like worker housing in Oslo. This is stucco. So a lot of different finishes, lots of different shapes. Here's Stockholm, Sweden. Here's Berlin, Germany. I could go on. They're all over the place. And about a year ago, I began asking myself, why was no one talking about how courtyard blocks helped European cities retain families? And I couldn't figure it out. And so I said, well, I'm going to talk about it. So in 2024, I began publishing about how Euro-style courtyard blocks as a solution for Chicago's family flight crisis. And as my account took off and I had the Tribune and Crane's Business and a number of legacy outlets have published my pieces, but also the high impact has been the Twitter account. And I eventually brought in my argument to show how this housing model could generally revitalize American cities and strengthen family and civic life. My main point has been that many people, especially families, want a house with a yard and a walkable neighborhood. But US cities have generally failed to provide this, pushing families, population, and tax revenue into the suburbs. US cities give you two options. You can have the low density residential option, and this is St. Louis residential neighborhood, which looks a lot like Chicago neighborhoods and a lot of legacy American city neighborhoods. Or you can have the high-rise, very dense neighborhood. And these can be very nice. Like we've all seen beautiful, nice homes in the low-rise density neighborhoods, but they don't have great yards because we put the alley and the trash in the center of the block. And they don't have enough density to support the amenities and like all the pieces that you need for the most walkable and the most valuable urban neighborhoods. And here, I mean, you have the density and the commercial integration, but you don't have the family-oriented units, right? You don't have the big house with the yard, and it's completely impossible to raise a large family out of a high-rise. And my follow-up point has been that US cities can imitate and improve the Euro courtyard designs that create the family-friendly house with a yard and the dense walkable neighborhood. So let's talk about the values that courtyard blocks offer families. We have the big house with a yard, urban conveniences, saving time and money, and childhood independence. We're going to go and talk in detail about each of these. The big house with a yard. So families obviously prefer big homes with yards. You have more people and you need the space. Americans tend to think of apartments and multifamily buildings as small and yardless rentals, but multifamily buildings can be condominiumized, allowing for home ownership, and they can include large and beautiful units. And to compete with the suburbs, some of the units need to be very large and they need to be very beautiful. And we're going to talk a little bit how the geometry works to get these beautiful window walls that we often see in these units. Now the yard. Families want a house with a yard. Courtyard blocks, by pushing the building mass to the perimeter of the block, they create this enclosed green space that is quiet, clean, shaded, and safe. The building perimeter wall keeps strangers out and it keeps little kids in. Courtyard is visible from a kitchen or bedroom window, making it ideal for parents who are monitoring small children. We're going to look at some courtyard pictures. They also come in all different shapes and sizes. A theme is a sandbox. If you have a 2 or 3-year-old, you probably know the value of a sandbox. Again, notice the difference in the finishes. And also this is obviously an old one with mature trees. Here's a newer one with more recent landscaping, stone facade, stucco. Oh, okay. So often I will get in these debates on social media where there will be a typical urbanist who is a childless man in his 20s or 30s, and he will tell me that people don't need private yards because we have public parks. And it's ridiculous to expect developers to put private yards in their buildings and to waste this space on yards when we have a public park that, people can take their kids to the public park. And I will often use Calvin and Hobbes to illustrate the value that an attached convenient yard has for parents. Because like here, Calvin is about to do a backflip into a shallow pool. And Hobbes says, better hurry, your mom's yelling something. Calvin's mom can care for him while he's playing outside, even though she's inside. She can see him from her kitchen window or from her bedroom, but she can still be a responsible parent and care for him even though he's playing outside in the yard. You can't do that if you're on the 20th floor of a high rise. You can't send your 6-year-old down the elevator and across the busy street to go play at the public park. And if they fall and hurt themselves, you're not there. And you can't call to them. You can't hear them. Parents need a place where the yard is right there so that they can actually care for their child and take care of tasks while they are still in their house, but still monitor their kid. And urban planners need to understand this because US cities just generally fail to include high quality yard space in new urban development, especially new multifamily development. Value number 2 is urban conveniences. Now, a great thing about city living is being within walking distance of all your daily destinations, or most of them. And so one form of urban convenience is access to retail. And you can look at the retail abundance on just one side of this courtyard block, but every side of every block has commercial on the ground floor because these are mixed-use buildings. And so you have a bicycle shop, an Italian takeout, a hair salon, a shawarma restaurant, vitamin and supplement store, a grocery store, an off-track bedding shop, I don't even know what that is, vintage clothing shop, children's clothing store, bubble tea, thrift shop, a laundromat. And this is good for residents because they have access to their commercial needs, but it's also good for small business owners because they have their customers that are living next door to them, above them, all around. And the people who live in this neighborhood don't get their creatine or their vitamins from Amazon. They can get them right here from the vitamin and supplement shop, and they can go and look at different products. They can talk to someone about their product. They don't have to deal with the packaging. It is why brick and mortar retail has thrived in these pervasively mixed use neighborhoods in cities in Europe and in Asia. In contrast, mixed use or commercial real estate has a bit of a harder time in the US. Value number 2, urban convenience is still, but also proximity to institutions. School, church, government offices, public parks, swimming pools, your symphony orchestra, you've got a great zoo here, all these things. So it's a wonderful thing, for anybody at any stage to be able to walk to a public park, to the post office to mail a package. But if you're a parent with a little kid, it is a super amazing thing if you can, instead of strapping all your kids into a car and into their car seats, if you can walk together to the post office or walk to a park. And you don't have to do the big struggle bus in the car. But it is next level if you get to the point where you have a 10, 11, 12-year-old who can walk him or herself to her swim lessons or to her choir practice or to school or to their friend's house. And so the proximity to institutions is another form of urban convenience that cities can uniquely offer to families. Proximity to the broader social and economic network. So your friends, your kids' friends, your church and your school community, employees and employers. The city's job is to bring all the different groups within society together. And this is good not just for the convenience and the comfort of the individual, but it also promotes social cohesion because you have all these different groups who are seeing each other and interacting with each other, who are engaging in business exchange and in cultural exchange in creative and productive ways that promote social cohesion. Yes, so cities can be places where they create housing and economies that bring families together across generations, where adult parents can have parents and siblings nearby, and parents who lay down roots, and hoping that their children might settle in that same city. And cities can do this better than suburbs because cities have the large economy, and they also have, or they can have the housing, but they need to build for all the generations if they want to have a multi-generational city. Right now, cities have been really good at building for the childless worker and like the smaller households generally. They have a harder time building for the middle-class large family, especially at density, because it's hard to do that at density if you are doing detached homes or detached buildings. Value number 3 is saving time and money. So urban multifamily housing saves families time and money, and that is because there are more efficient use of land, drives down the housing cost per square foot. You have maybe 8 to 10 households that are sharing the land instead of just one household. And then you have shared walls and shared heating and cooling system costs. So an attached single-family home, you're going to have all 4 sides of the building that are exposed to the elements. In a perimeter block structure like this, you're going to have 2 walls, and then one of the walls is exposed to the courtyard, which is also already kind of buffered and similar to the one that's exposed to the street. These are just more shaded, protected structures because of the way that the city and the neighborhood and that fabric is built. Also, no front yard and a shared courtyard means more time for other activities. Okay, there's no front setbacks, so there's no front yard. And that decreases the amount of time and money spent on lawn maintenance. And then you have the courtyard, and that cost is shared. You are also saving time and money because your neighborhood is mixed use and walkable. And this is when one car or even car-free households become feasible. And this leads to great savings on gas and car insurance and car maintenance and parking. So a big difference between the cities and the suburbs is that in general, in the cities, you spend less time in your car. And so cities can really offer families freedom from car culture, which has gotten out of control. Like this is like a school pickup line. And I see these posted a lot on social media. It's just out of control. And a lot of, like Chicago doesn't even do buses anymore, and the traffic is ridiculous. And then here is, I think this is a line for an In-N-Out burger or something, but in general, you spend less time in your car when you're living in a city because you have a more walkable neighborhood and you're just driving shorter distances. And this means you're giving families freedom from car culture, and that means more time and money. Value number 4 is childhood independence. Okay, the courtyard is not just a valuable amenity for parents, but it is an important developmental space for children. And that's because it's a safe and contained space where they can play without constant direct supervision. And this becomes especially nice when they're this age and you can send them out to play with other kids. So I have a small backyard and it's fenced off like all the Chicago yards because there's an alley and there's a lot of traffic in the alley and people going through the alley. And so I wasn't in a position where I could send my kids to play with other kids in the backyard. I had to take them to the park, which is fine. I like going to the park, but sometimes my older child would want to play at the park with friends while a younger sibling was napping and she wasn't really old enough to take herself. And that became a big pain. And this is an ideal setup because you can just send your kids to play outside with the other kids on the block. And then when they're older, like 10, 11, 12, they can start getting themselves to places with their friends. And so here's where cities can offer families a safe place for children to explore their environment independently. A walkable destination is a destination that a 10-year-old can get to. And this is made safe through, we heard earlier about density, means active street life, no neighbors, more eyes on the street, means safer public ways. So just to recap the values that courtyard blocks can offer families: the big house with a yard, the urban conveniences, saving time and money, and childhood independence. So that's kind of the why. And now we're going to get into exactly what are the essential components of courtyard blocks. And here's where I want everybody who's in the construction industry to pay really deep attention, because these details matter, and I just want to plant the seed. And everybody else, I want you to pay attention too, because it's going to change the way that you see buildings and the way that you judge, especially multifamily buildings and just your built environment. So the four components are small lot buildings, wide and shallow buildings with no front or side setbacks, mixed use buildings, and unit diversity, okay? So often people will send me pictures of a courtyard like this and say, look, Alicia, we already have courtyard blocks in Texas. And I will say, first of all, this looks like a drowning hazard in the middle of no parent with a 2-year-old is going to want to live in this building. And second of all, this is not a courtyard block, this is a courtyard mega development. And there's a big difference, and we want to understand the difference between a courtyard block that is made up of small lot buildings that are put together and a mega development. And the fact that this is a mega development becomes apparent when we look at the aerial view. You can see that this is just one single building. And at the floor plans. So this is 264 units total, and it is a mix of studio, 1-bedroom, and 2 bedrooms. It includes a lot of stuff, and that means it was very expensive. It was about a 60 to 70 million project to build, okay? And that means it required a very large and a very heavily financed developer to do. If you look at the courtyard blocks, you will notice that these are not a single building. These are many. Do you see how they're separate buildings? There are many of them. There are many small lot buildings, and they achieve a similar floor area as a mega development, or even more, but it's chunked into 10 or 20 smaller buildings. Again, I want you to focus on how this is not a single development. These are multiple buildings that are built wall to wall. And this is very important for the social scale and for many reasons. So let's get into them. For one, it means that they are lower cost and broader participation. The smaller buildings don't require elevators, or only very small ones. They don't require underground parking. They don't require luxury amenities or the high cost materials that are associated with larger developments. And this reduces both the upfront and the long-term costs, making the resulting units more naturally affordable over a very long term. They're affordable to operate and to maintain, and to just maintain over time. And this opens the door to a wider range of builders, including small developers, community groups, and even homeowner developers, someone who builds one of these buildings, lives in one unit, and rents the other ones, and it becomes an owner-occupied investment property. And so instead of one mega developer building a $60 to $70 million project, you might have 20 local developers building 20 $2 to $3 million projects. Better social scale. People feel more at ease in smaller multifamily buildings where they share entrances, stairs, and common spaces with a limited number of households, typically just 8 to 10 rather than dozens or hundreds. Okay, residents are more likely to recognize neighbors, build trust, take shared responsibility for common areas, and to feel a greater sense of personal security. The large buildings, I mean, they can feel like hotels. They can feel like dormitories. And this often leads to social isolation and weaker community bonds. This is a corridor leading from, well, I took this in Rome in June, and I'm standing in the courtyard looking through the corridor out to the street. And this here, like the stair and the small elevator that residents use to access their units is over here. But this is a really nice way that Italians set up their courtyard buildings, where they have this central corridor leading from the street to the courtyard, so everybody can access it via the courtyard, via that corridor, and then they have the stairs going up to all the units. Okay, second reason why small lot buildings are better, they create better streets and blocks. You want the horizontal density. Small lot buildings mean you have more buildings per block. That means more entrances, it means more businesses, and this creates economic and social complexity, and that means more resilience, okay? Because if one business fails, there are all the other ones that are still open. You also get a good mix of incomes, a good ratio of owner-occupied to rental. We want both. We want lots of rental. We need the rental because that makes the neighborhood more dynamic and people can come in, and you definitely want a lot of rental, but you also want the owner-occupied units too. And you want a good mix of household sizes and ages. They also create more visually interesting blocks. We love to look at these street walls with all the different buildings. In contrast, the megadevelopments often have these monotonous street walls that deter pedestrians and community interaction. They also target smaller households, often high-income small households, excluding families altogether. This is in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is building a lot of these right now, and it's not going to be good for their ability to retain families. Developers know that people crave small lot urbanism, but they struggle to deliver it. We see this all the time. We see this at Disneyland, and we see this is a commercial building. It used to be a warehouse in Edmonton, Canada, and it's a warehouse, and they slapped on a facade to make it look like a fine-grained, mixed-use Amsterdam street. And developers have forgotten how to create the real thing. They know that people like it. They know that we're attracted to this, but they don't know how to, maybe they know how to build it if they thought about it, but they don't even know, they are not doing it. And one important component they're missing is doing the small lot building. The second component is the wide and shallow building with no front or side setbacks. So, this building form is key for two reasons. The first is that it creates the perimeter block conditions that are necessary for the tranquil, private courtyard amenity. And the second reason is that it creates the dual aspect, lives like a house units with excellent natural light and ventilation. I'm going to go explain those in further detail in just a moment. So let's contrast this with the typical St. Louis block, which is very similar to Chicago. I live on a block that's very similar to this in Chicago, so I understand this extremely well. So these blocks have narrow and long lots, about 25 feet wide by 125 deep. And they are small side setbacks that are separating the buildings, allowing for some light and ventilation at the building center, but still not great lighting and ventilation due to the long sides of the building being obstructed. And I want to show you this. The mass of the building is pushed back to the lot, and the long sides of the building are completely obstructed if it's wall to wall, or they are partially obstructed. All right, because here's your front of the house, and the long sides are right next to another building, okay? So not great lighting and ventilation due to the long side of the buildings are obstructed. Also, the front setback, so you can see there's a bit of a front setback between the sidewalk and the beginning of the building, and that pushes the building into the block, and that means there's less area in the inside of the block for the yard, okay? And then the alleys and the side setbacks make the block porous, allowing noise, cars, and other disturbances to penetrate easily from the street into the interior. Now let's compare with Prague. So the lots and the multifamily buildings are wider. They're about 50 to 60 feet wide, more in the case of the corner buildings, and there's no alley, and they're about 5 to 6 stories tall. And so because they're wider and shallower, you've got the long side of the rectangle that has the window walls, okay? And so this is key. They're just pivoting it 90 degrees, the building, so you get the long side of the building that has the exposure to the street and to the backyard. And this is key to making these really nice units that live like a house and that are in some ways better than a house. And we'll go into that more later. And they also create more green space and more density. So Prague has about 33,000 people per square mile. And compared to the north side of Chicago, where I live, where it's about 23,000 people per square mile. We don't have any yards nearly as nice as this in Chicago. There's much less green space because of the way the buildings are pushed back. So even though we have less density, we also have less green space, okay? And so with this perimeter block design, because the perimeter, math people, you know how in geometry, the greater area is at the perimeter of the square, right? And so you're making better use of the greater area around the perimeter of these blocks, and you're able to get more that density, that great floor area, but also leave enough space on the inside for the green space. So Fox Park right now has about 9,400 people per square mile. It has a lot of room for growth, okay? The shallow building means that some units can be dual aspect with a front and a back. Not all of them need to be, but some of them, the ones that are for the nice ones, for the families, for a forever home for a family, they need to be front and back. And that's because you want a front side that is connected to the street. You can see what's going on at the street. You can hear what's going on. You have that connection to the public life on the public way. And then you also want a window that is facing the courtyard, so you can see your kids playing out there, but also that you can have a side on the quiet side of the house. I lived in a high-rise for a little bit before while we were house hunting for our home in Lincoln Square, and it was always noisy because there's no back of the house, there's no quiet side of a high-rise because of the way they're structured. And there's always sirens and traffic noise that you cannot get away from when you're in a high-rise just because of the way that the freestanding building is designed. But with the courtyard block design, you can have a quiet side of the house, and that's where you put your bedrooms, that's where you put the studies and the rooms that you need to be quiet. Okay, we are going to talk now about the double-loaded corridor. This is important because it's part of the reason why these mega developments are unattractive and why the wide and shallow building, it makes possible these single stairs, and they differ from the double-loaded corridor buildings, which don't have the front and the back. So here, this is a double-loaded corridor, and it's called double-loaded because it's got units off of the corridor. And so residents will come in any of these multiple entrances and access all of the units via the corridor. But you can see that they don't have the dual aspect unit. They don't have a front and back. This unit only has an aspect on this yard. This unit only has an aspect of view to the courtyard. And even the ones that are not opposite of other units, they're opposite of the parking garage. So when you have this kind of organization of a building, you don't have that front to back unit, you don't have the dual aspect units, and you don't have the quiet side and the public side of the house. So the wide and shallow floor plates are important because they enable what's called point access or single stair buildings with the 8 to 10 units sharing a single entry. So this would be a cross section. You just have a stairway going up, and then you can kind of carve up the building whatever you need to. Here's a design of showing how you might do like a 3 units on a floor, but you can also have really big units taking up the entire floor plate, okay? Or what I've seen and I really like is when you can duplex units, and then you really get like a dual level house where you can have, you know, the bedrooms maybe up here and the common areas down here. And then this is also how you avoid sharing walls with another unit. The people up here, if you do a duplex unit, they wouldn't be sharing an interior wall with anyone. and there'd be another building right here, but you would have a firewall separating them, and you would not hear anything. So this kind of design is good for acoustics, as well as this experience of living like a house, which people really want. And then you get these amazing window walls, okay? So this is a building in Prague. We're gonna look at a bunch of these here, and you can tell that you're in a courtyard block unit when you see these beautiful street frontages and stretches of window walls. This is in Stockholm, courtyard. So in sum, the wide and shallow buildings with no setbacks create the conditions for the private courtyard amenity by pushing the building mass to the perimeter of the block. And they create the units that live like a big house with a yard, thanks to the generous proportions and the excellent lighting and ventilation and the point access entry, that single stairwell going up. Now, essential component number 3 is mixed use, maximizing walkability and daily convenience. Mixed use, you're mixing residential and commercial uses. This really defines urban living, putting people in close proximity to the commercial, social, and institutional destinations. It's what sets cities apart from the suburbs, and it is essential for walkability and for thriving brick and mortar retail. But you can't do this, you can't do it just like the corner store and the commercial strip. It needs to be pervasively integrated. And then you need to have enough density too to support the businesses. Now, US cities lack a strong tradition of doing mixed use development, and this is because US cities are patterned on English cities. And English cities are kind of why American cities are so messed up. Because in English cities, that's where we get the long and narrow lots. In England, Edinburgh and in Scotland, they're the only UK city that does the courtyard blocks. In the rest of England, they do the narrow lots and the row homes. They put the families in the terraced homes. That means the homes, the single family homes, the row homes with the yard. They don't do these mixed use multifamily buildings that are wide and shallow. And so we tend to put shopping in our commercial space into these auto-oriented, these car-oriented commercial developments, the drive-to box stores, even in the cities, okay? And that's why a lot of our cities are just as car dependent as our suburbs are. And so this is this South Kings Highway that has this big commercial strip with the Home Depot and stuff. And we have the same thing in my neighborhood in Chicago where they put in a big commercial strip. And if I need to get kids' shoes now, I need to drive to Target because the Target put the children's shoe store in my neighborhood out of business. And so if you put these drive-to commercial strips in the city, it makes it harder for the neighborhood brick and mortar to survive. But if you can figure this out, the benefits of doing mixed-use buildings well means more walkable neighborhoods, more diversified real estate, and for the residents, it means less time and money spent on transportation and more time and money spent in local community and more money in neighborhood businesses. And they can do it, okay? This is a Chick-fil-A in Chicago that's in a mixed-use building. This is a Target. It's not a very attractive building, but even Target will go. This is in River North, more downtown, but it will go into a mixed-use building. And remember, cities can offer something that the suburbs cannot, and that's the walkable neighborhood. And that's because cities can do the density and the commercial integration, and the suburbs will never have the density to do this kind of walkable neighborhood. But the mixed use is key. Even Home Depot. This is a Home Depot in Manhattan, okay? And if Home Depot can go into a mixed use building, then anybody can go into a mixed use building. Number 4, essential component, is unit diversity. You need a mix of units from very small to very large because this creates room for the small households and the large households. You want studio to 4-bedroom plus. And it creates the natural demographic diversity without formal subsidy. So in the US, we tend to follow the English pattern of where multifamily buildings will target specific income groups and household sizes. And it's just part of like the English, we just want to segregate everything. And so we'll put all the high income families in suburban single-family homes, and we'll put all the low-income families in, for subsidized housing, and we'll put all the seniors in retirement homes, and all the childless workers in high-rises. And in European cities, historically, unfortunately, a lot of post-World War II development has been, and even in Europe, has been influenced by the English model of monozoning and segregating everyone. But historically, there's a tradition of doing mixed units, even within the building and the block. And so this is an illustration from like a Victorian, so like 1860s newspaper, and it shows the typical building in Paris. This is the Haussmann buildings in Paris, where they have this vertical distribution of wealth. And typically, this is before elevators, and so it went from rich to poor. But the shopkeepers would have like live-work units on the ground floor. The very wealthy people would live on the first floor, and they would have higher ceilings and nicer finishes. And then you'd have the middle-class families. Then you'd have like the bachelors and the students and the smaller households. And then like the low-income households would be at the top. Now there might be a reverse. If you have an elevator, then maybe the more valuable units would be on the top. Although I still think for families, I would want to be as close to the ground as possible when you have little kids. But this is how you create deep demographic diversity at the level of the building and the block and the neighborhood. This is good for businesses because they thrive on a diverse stream of customers that are drawn from the immediate neighborhood. Different kinds of households have different schedules and they have different needs. And so if you're at 10 o'clock, you might have all, the mom, the stay-at-home parents and the seniors. And then later in the day, you might have the workers, but you're going to have more people with different schedules. And this is good for businesses. And again, that unit diversity is a powerful tool for multi-generational living and for social cohesion. And I don't mean multi-generational households. I'm not talking about putting everybody in the same household. I'm talking about having neighborhoods that have housing for all the generations, so that you might have the grandparents living in a condo in the same neighborhood where the parents have their condo that is bigger and closer to the yard. So to recapitulate here, the four essential components of strong courtyard blocks are the small lot buildings, the wide and shallow buildings, mostly mixed use, not all of them need to be, but most of them need to be, and unit diversity. These are the building blocks of complete life cycle cities, where people can grow up, raise families, age in place, and stay rooted for generations. And they have been this way for hundreds of years too, so we know it works. So how do we do courtyard developments in St. Louis? I think that there are two paths to courtyard developments. One is a planned block or district, and the second is the infill building. The PUD, okay? This would be my ideal scenario. I think this is the most grassroots and democratic. I think it has the most opportunity for people to get involved. And this is where you have a site developer who makes a PUD, which is a planned unit development, and then a parcel sale. So you need to acquire the land. So this could be a single person, or it could be a group of friends, a group of families. It could be a community developer, a community group. And you're going to target a block within, Fox Park, and you could get land via, if there's some LRA land, or if you negotiate the private sales, you get the land. And then you're going to create your PUD. And this is a site plan for the courtyard layout with the mixed use elements. You're going to have to get a lot of approvals and work with the alder and all the things. And then you're going to subdivide it into 4 to 8 parcels, and you're going to do some legal preparations for the courtyard management. Like basically, the courtyard's going to have to be managed by some form of an HOA. And you're going to install the infrastructure and establish codes and covenants and restrictions that would limit how people can build out the parcels. And then you're going to sell the parcels to small developers and have them build it out. And I think that is a model that could be done incrementally and over time, and that would be really exciting to see that. And that is actually how they were done historically, okay? So I know that that is how that works because that is how all the neighborhoods that I've shown you here from Europe, this is how they were done, okay? There wasn't a mega developer doing the whole thing. They had, it's called a form-based code, basically. There is a plan for the form of these buildings, and a bunch of small developers would go and just build it out. So you have, you just have such great architecture here. I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting touching any of these buildings, but I want you to think about what inspiration you'll take and what changes. You basically have the language, you just need to learn the Courtyard block dialect. And the dialect is going to be a little bit different here. So you can see how, if you look at this white block here, those are 3 row homes. You see they're the narrow, long row home. And you're basically going to do a building that is that width. So you're going to triple the width of this kind of building. You're going to go up 2 more stories, and you're going to put commercial on the bottom. Remove that front setback, but you're going to keep the mansard roof, and you're going to keep these wonderful architectural details because they're amazing. So yeah, you've already got the language. You just need to learn this Courtyard block dialect. You even have the commercial integration. It just needs to be more pervasive. And if someone has the ability to work with retailers and get them in on the development ahead of time, so you can have it already, like, work with a retailer in mind to make the space, that they will go into the space, then that would be even better. So if I were you, I would suggest developing parcels along Gravois Ave, and I would collaborate with the Missouri DOT to narrow Gravois, because Gravois, am I saying that right? Yes, okay. So it was widened in the 1920s as part of this big initiative to accommodate all the new automobile traffic, and they widened it. And of course, this made it easier for people to leave the city, and then they put the expressways in, and that made it even easier for people to leave the city. And there are road diets happening all over, and cities are, DOTs are vacating the right-of-way, and you can get, I think it'd be so exciting to get a parcel like this and narrow the street and build out into Gravois. And the developer could build, and so return it to its 2-lane. It should be a 2-lane road. And that will make it safer. It will address traffic safety issues. And it will also instantaneously increase the value of every property adjacent to it, because nobody wants to own a property on a busy, wide road. People want to be on narrow streets. So if you can narrow it, if you can get wider sidewalks, some trees, then you're going to have really valuable real estate. At the same time, you're making it safer for people to cross the street. And yeah, and if you can find a retailer, I know that Aldi, Barnes & Noble, CVS, they are all stores that have shown, like, they're doing more of the urban format businesses, but try to find a retailer in advance who can help plan to go into that ground floor. This triangle here, this is right by the church. I think this would be amazing to develop. And you can do, I just want to give you an example of these triangular lots. Even if you've got a tight angle, you can still do a building that's not quite an L shape, but more of like a V shape. But again, increasing the buildable land by narrowing the streets is more taxable property for the city, and it's more valuable private space for the residents. And all the properties along Gravois will become more valuable if it is narrowed, especially if the sidewalks are widened and parkways and trees are also put in. Oh, and so this is an example, it's not just St. Louis, every city has done this, and this is Berlin. And this is really interesting because you can see how they destroyed some of the buildings that were making up a courtyard block on the left to put in that urban expressway, and they realized the error of their ways, and they wanted to correct it, and so now they are narrowing that. They're returning that street to its original width. They're putting trees in, and they are completing the courtyard by adding those buildings, okay? All right, the second path is the infill building. And this is where, if you already have some good buildings around a block, I think that it would make sense to acquire 3 to 4 parcels, and you design a mixed-use multifamily building, wide, shallow, maybe 4 stories, get zoning approval for the variances for the front and side setbacks if you need them, you build it out, and maybe you occupy 1 unit and you lease out the commercial and residential units. Remember, they can be really simple, inexpensive buildings, okay? And they're simple, but they're valuable due to the perimeter design. It's kind of passively valuable. But if you're going 75 feet wide, so you're either building an L or V or a box. And if you're doing the basic box and you're going 70 feet wide, 40 feet deep, going up 4 stories, and is it like $200 a square foot to build? Or I don't know what it is here, but then you have maybe a $2.4 million project here. And if you're leasing out 4 of the or 6 units or so, then I don't know how long it would take you to get a return on your investment, but you can see how these can become an investment property easily. If you need help, I have partnered with a very talented architect and urban planner, and we are offering family-friendly design consulting services, and we can give you feedback on a project. We would love to. We've got some really exciting designs, both for planned developments and for infill. We're calling our company Schwartz and Urbe Consulting, and we're going to help people put gardens in the city. Alina, she's a Chicago mom and architect, and her family's from Germany, and so she knows this, she's lived in this, and has a lot of experience designing in Chicago, but also living this and understanding this, how it works in Germany. So, further thoughts and conclusions. I want to talk about stone construction, and I want to talk about converting through streets into plazas. Now, I think the most interesting thing that's happening in development right now, aside from courtyard urbanism, obviously, is what Micah Springa is doing with structural stone. So we used to build a lot with stone, and we stopped in the 20th century because concrete and steel became a lot cheaper to build with than with stone. Micah is using AI-assisted robots and prefabrication techniques to radically decrease the cost of stone construction. And I'm interested in this because that building I showed you that I lived in Italy was made of stone. I've been in a lot of multifamily buildings. I think masonry is great. All buildings are great. I have a soft spot for stone buildings because they're just quieter, they're cooler, the acoustics are better, they last forever. The thermal mass of the stone means that your heating and cooling costs are less over time. There are all these benefits. They're naturally beautiful, but you don't even need to put cladding on them because they're just beautiful. And he's just starting this. He's got these AI-assisted robots. He was doing stone statuary, but his real goal is to just start a revolution in stone construction in the United States. And it's interesting, should be interesting to you because St. Louis is on a lot of stone quarries. Unlike Chicago, which has garbage stone, St. Louis has amazing stone. This is a map. All those red dots are old stone quarries. And I think it would be, it's great limestone. I think it would be the coolest thing in the world if St. Louis catches this wave of this new technological revolution in stone construction, which is like happening just starting now, and is able to build beautiful buildings out of it, but even start exporting stone to cities like Chicago that don't have good stone. So I think this is a really promising industry for St. Louis, both as an export industry, but also for building really high quality multifamily buildings. The second further thought is converting through streets into plazas. So the US cities don't have a lot of great private spaces, and they also don't have a lot of great public spaces. So when you're in Europe, every time you turn a corner, there's some cute piazza or plaza and a place where people are hanging out. And we don't have those in the US. Now, one example from my neighborhood in Chicago, and I don't understand why we don't do this all over the place. This is the only one, and it was so successful. It needs to be done more frequently. But so this is in Lincoln Square. Lincoln Ave is one of those diagonal streets that goes through the north side of Chicago. Giddings Street used to be a through street, okay? And there was a community group in the 90s. This is recent history, okay? A community group got together and they said, we're gonna convert that Giddings Plaza between the alley and Lincoln Ave, and we're gonna turn it into, or we're gonna make it a plaza. They put bollards on one end and bollards on the other. They put, this is actually a fountain, but in the winter, they put a Christmas tree on one end, and then you can see on the other end, they have a nice lamppost. You can see the fountain on the other end. And then they have this raised dais where there's concerts in the summer, a concert series. This is the most happening place in the neighborhood. There is such a hub, and it is a third place where people are hanging out. The businesses in this area are thriving. The landowners never have trouble finding tenants for the businesses, and there are condos and rental units above these businesses. They never have any trouble renting them out. And on the left, this is what Lincoln Avenue used to look in the 1950s. This is how it looks today. In addition to converting that through street into a plaza, they also widened the sidewalks like you need to do on Gravois. And they also put in trees. And again, this is the most charming stretch of the north side. And this is not expensive to do. It's not expensive to convert a through street into plaza. And it's really like the most bang for your buck. And if I were doing it here, like maybe Texas Ave between Sydney and Gravois, or Iowa between Lynch and Gravois. There's so many great little through streets that would be wonderful, but you need to do it in conjunction with mixed-use buildings, because what makes this wonderful is that people come and hang out at the cafes and also hear the music and gather. But you need to have people coming there for the commercial uses as well as the plaza. It needs to be done with the mixed-use buildings. All right, so in conclusion, families need cities because cities can provide them with the big house with the yard, the urban conveniences, like the proximity to the economic and social networks and institutions, and it can create this urban lifestyle where parents save time and money through low maintenance housing and lower transportation costs. And it's also a place where children can develop independence. And we're unfortunately at a time where kids are not given many opportunities to socialize normally in real life, in physical spaces with other kids. And families need cities because cities can have those third places and spaces where kids can socialize with each other. And cities need families because of the tax revenue for infrastructure, for city services, for public pensions, for improved public safety. You need to have that density, and you need the families there because families care. Whenever there's an incident in our neighborhood, if there's a tent that goes up in the park, there's all the moms that call the alder right away and get it taken down. You need the families because they care, and they also bring the density. You can't have a high density city if all the families are living in the suburbs, okay? Your city's not gonna grow if you don't build it for families. Yeah, so sustainable growth. The cities need families for sustainable growth. And I know that's a lot. I wanna take some questions now maybe, but I just want to add that I'm so excited for St. Louis, and I was saying this last night to some of the community here. I've been trying to get Chicago interested in this kind of development, and there's a lot of interest. It's really hard to build in Chicago because Chicago is very expensive, and it's just hard to do anything in Chicago right now. But I feel like St. Louis is a place where land is deeply affordable and where you have more motivation maybe to do some creative urban planning and do something different than what the suburbs are doing, better than the suburbs, but also different than what other cities are doing. Something different and better, but also something that's building on some of the rich architectural traditions that you already have going for you. So I will take questions now, maybe, and then we can have our social hour. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we'll bring a mic to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? That was a really interesting talk, and I'm very interested in this. A lot of the stuff you describe is stuff I know from James Howard Kunstler. I'm sure you're
Yes.
aware of some, especially the street stuff. So the question I have is, there's a motivation, it seems to me, that you touched on but didn't really develop, which I think is especially pertinent to Catholic families, which is generational continuity. So it seems to me like a lot of families, a lot of Catholic families, they're trying to find places where they feel that their kids are going to live, hopefully not move away. That's not necessarily a traditional American concern, but it's important to Catholics. When you're contrasting this project in the US with the project in Europe, or the reality in Europe, it seems to me a big difference is that in Europe, people feel a membership in their cities in a way that Americans don't. And if you're trying to build this from the ground up in the US, you're going to have to take that into account. So how do you present this project to people, to Catholics who want to feel like they have some influence over the public space that they're going to be able to pass on to their children?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. It's really interesting. And I agree, there is this difference, and I saw it. I saw these families living in Florence that have been there for generations. And I grew up in suburban Michigan, and my grandparents lived in Florida, in Indianapolis, and I had aunts and uncles all over the place. And then, of course, I'm living in Chicago while my parents are still in West Michigan. There's no continuity at all. And part of my motivation for staying in Chicago and raising our kids in Chicago is that I think there's a better chance that my children will grow up and want to be in Chicago than they will if I move to a suburb or whatever. And I think that I think that we need to just have better cities, and cities that really, I think that the answer is just better housing in cities for families, because we have the population around the cities. They just don't live in the cities because the cities have not been very nice places to live for families. And I think that if we make our cities nicer for families, then you're going to get more affection and loyalty for these cities over time. But like the economy is a big part. You need to have an economy that is large and diversified enough to provide employment for the different generations and branches of the family over time. But the housing too, you need a diversity and quality of housing that will retain these families over time. Yeah. Yes. Or I'm sorry, Dan.
Yeah. Oh, I loved your talk. It was so full of interest, packed. I've read Kunstler too. I'm a big fan. So one thing I was thinking as you were talking is, it almost felt like you were really intending this for an audience of deep-pocketed developers who are in a position to implement these ideas, but you're actually talking to people who probably are just struggling to make ends meet because they have big families, they're Catholics, and I don't know how rich people are in this audience and how able they're able to do this. So how do you respond to that? I mean, is this something practical for ordinary people to implement some of the ideas you just gave us at the end? Or is this really something you wish there were a few deep-pocketed developers here in the audience?
Yeah, well, no, you need capital to build a multifamily building. So you're going to need someone with the capital to build the building. But where the community can come in is to like establishing the need, the want for it, saying like, hey, we would be really excited to have this kind of development come here. But also, I think that if you, like a $2.4 million building, I mean, if you pool a couple of families or a couple of smaller developers, you could come up with enough money for a construction loan. I mean, I think that that is within the reach of maybe a group of individuals within a church or a community development. But yeah, I think that the community comes in establishing the desire for this kind of development. But yes, construction is really expensive, and you're going to need someone with capital in it too. But I would say, even if you're not the capital, even if you're not the developer doing it, there's maybe people who are in the trades who would like to, participate in building something like this, and who, might be excited or inspired about getting into a trade or development if they're building something that has a lot of value for their community like this.
Thank you, and I really appreciate how you answered all my questions as you went through your talk. It was really beautiful to see how that unfolded. When I'm looking at these pictures that you have all over the screen, I see that these city blocks are much larger than what we have in America. Our blocks are much smaller. What is the ideal size? I know they come in all different sizes and shapes, and there's probably a range, but how do you grow that ideal size of a enclosed urban development?
That's a really good point. And the pictures that I picked, I just love those really big ones because they're so striking. But there's small ones. I think that you could, like if you have a PUD and you have a lot of land, and when I came in on the train, there is land. There are parking lots that are big, and there's a lot of land in St. Louis where you could do a bigger block. But even some of these are smaller. And I think, I worked out the dimensions once of like the minimum, and you can still, it doesn't need to be huge, because again, remember, you want a courtyard that is, bigger than the postage stamp yards that we have in the back of these row homes, but big enough where you can have families send their kids out and they can run around. You can put a sandbox and a swing set. But this isn't supposed to be a place where kids are having pickup, baseball games. When they're old enough to have pickup baseball games, they're old enough to go to the public park. Okay, when they're 10 or 12, they can go to the public park, and that's fine. This is a place for little kids, because there's a long time. If you've got, and some of you have enormous families, and I that's amazing. But if you've got 2 or 3 kids and they're spaced 2 years apart, there's a really long time where you have a kid that can't walk themselves to the park. And you need a yard that's big enough to send them outside and let them play in the sandbox or run around and play with other kids, but they're going to be safe, and they're not going to like wander into the alley and get run over, or there's not going to be somebody coming in and hurting them. And so it doesn't need to be huge. I think you can still have a very valuable courtyard development, even if it's not in a very, very big space. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I've seen small ones that work well. Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation and your articulation of the vision. I have been to Italy and been to Florence, and I know some of the things that you're describing, and the way you described it, I guess, is again a way to articulate what I appreciated about Florence without necessarily knowing what I was looking at the time. Okay, that notion of the mixed use of the commercial buildings down below, and it doesn't take very far to go before you find a gelateria, and then you go next block over and there's another one there, and it's, everybody's got a chance to socialize. So my next question to you is I can see the appeal, and I'm sure I can speak for many here that will see the appeal and want this as well. My question to you is the bureaucracies that can exist to try to facilitate this or get in the way of it. Italy has a reputation of having a bureaucracy that's very slow and tries to prohibit these kind of things, but they recognize the good of these and they try to maintain it. I think that's why the Italian bureaucracy is like that, is that they're trying not to get too modern. They want to hold on tradition, even down to building materials. To speak to American bureaucracy and even the local St. Louis, has this presentation been shared with the city of St. Louis and those that would be approving our business code or the building codes and the requests to do this kind of work? Or is that something that we're going to have to still yet do?
That's what you need to do. And I will give this to you, and you guys can send it. Anybody who wants a copy of this, I will give it to you. And I would love to have you share this with the planning department and your alders and whoever needs to make this happen, because you're definitely going to need the cooperation and the collaboration of the city. And it is going to be a public-private partnership. And so it's simple, but it's not easy, and there are a lot of different parts. But the payoff is so great, because you could just transform your neighborhood, and you could just be a model for how to do family-friendly density in North America, because there's nothing like this here. There's nothing, and people are dying for this. I mean, since 2020, I've just watched family after family leave. They wanted to stay, but they couldn't find the house with the yard. They would have loved something like this. I would prefer this. I have what's called a Chicago 2 flat. It's a multifamily, 2 small units that are stacked on top of each other. We rented out 1 unit initially, and then we had a 3rd kid, and we needed the space. We adapted it to single family use. But I would definitely prefer this, because I want a bigger yard, and I don't like my alley.
How about this?
I can hear you.
Again, I appreciate the presentation, and earlier in the afternoon, I think Mr. Marck was talking about how there was an organization that was able to recognize the church's influence for economic activity.
Yeah.
And I appreciate understanding the role of the churches as one of the cultural assets. Do you have any sense or any thoughts about how a private church might be even more than a cultural asset, that might be a community maker?
Well, yes, I think, there's that quotation by Hillary Clinton, it takes a village to raise a child. And I belong to a Catholic parish in Chicago, and I always think of it takes a parish to not just raise a child, but really a parish can make a community happen. And I think that the organizational capacity of the parish and just the leadership of the parish will be key. And as he so ably described, I mean, the parish is it's more than just a building and a campus, although it's that, but it is the presence of the canons here as to the safety and just their spiritual and cultural leadership that will be really helpful. I mean, I think it's a reason why is it Mike Schwartz, who was, who said that he wanted to be here because there's of this church here, this community. And I think that you should have it be a goal to get enough people living here to reopen that school, because then that will add, that's the next step, right? You need to get more families living here. And, but I think you could do it. That should be a goal. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. My question is a little bit more on the practical side. So I'm from Buffalo, where large parts of Buffalo have an enormous occupancy problem, especially with commerce and retail businesses and corporate businesses that have evacuated from the downtown city limits. And so I've seen the struggle of trying to get businesses back in and sell them on the idea that if they move in, then individuals and apartments and families will come and follow that. It seems like there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg game here, where you're trying to get individuals to move in and families to move in, and sell them on the idea that they have walkable storefronts, while giving the walkable storefronts, trying to sell them on the idea that families are going to move in. So, and I think that the real problem is that nobody wants to be the first, just in case it doesn't work out. So when I'm thinking about this, it sounds like to me that if you're trying to get businesses to move in, you kind of need to build a coalition of them first that all agree to move in together. So from a family perspective, when, if a community like this wants to back the building of this, how would you recommend us approaching businesses, especially given that we probably want a blend of local businesses and also larger corporate who can back the long-term, cash flow?
I think that as a community, I think a business would respond to a community saying like, hey, we really want you to come here and here. We think we have the density to support your business. We are really committed to supporting local businesses. But, and you could say we're also adding a lot of density. Here are the projects that we've added. Here's the number of families that we added. Here are all the families that are going to be coming. We're doing this new exciting thing of courtyard urbanism, which has been proven to support local businesses in other countries. And I think you can make a pitch. There's a pitch to be made here. I will say that the cities where brick and mortar retail are thriving in these courtyard block cities, they do a carrot and a stick. And the carrot is they will offer like tax incentives to the neighborhood businesses. Maybe St. Louis is already doing this, but they need some help. It's not just the drive-to box stores, but there's also e-commerce. And there's the stick, and the stick is those cities really restrict those box stores coming into the city limits. They exist, but they make it harder for them to do that. And I mean, I've seen it on the north side of Chicago, and it's just the most frustrating thing. They allowed a drive-to Target and a drive-to Home Depot to come in, and now there are no local neighborhood hardware stores. And so you need to, one way you can support these neighborhood storefronts is keeping those drive-to, the car-oriented stores out. And it's not that you don't want those businesses in. We want Home Depot in, but we want them on the ground floor of a neighborhood mixed-use building, okay? So say, yes, you can come and do business. We want your business, but you need to come into a storefront of a mixed-use building. You can't have your parking apron in this box store. So, but yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky, and it's something that U.S. cities really struggle with. But they don't struggle with as much in Europe and Asia, where they have much greater density and they have much better support for the businesses and more restrictions on the car-oriented businesses.
Excellent. Thank you. That wraps up our Q&A session. Next up, we will have a social hour with accompaniment by Landolfi String Quartet. With that, let's thank Alicia Pederson with a round of applause.